Who will be the next coach to win their first college football national championship? This question has gone around a lot over the past month and a half, ever since Ryan Day joined the club of active coaches with a national championship, of course after Ohio State's 34-23 CFP title game win over Notre Dame. There are now only 3 coaches with a national title on their resume that are active. The only other ones right now with a trophy are Clemson's Dabo Swinney and Georgia's Kirby Smart, both with 2 CFP titles. If you look back through the CFP and the BCS titles, it's amazing to see the coaches that are now out of the head coaching ranks. Jim Harbaugh and Pete Carroll are both in the NFL. Nick Saban and Urban Meyer are both retired. Ed Orgeron, Gene Chizik, Jimbo Fisher, all 3 got fired. Mac Brown he either just resigned or was fired, depending on who or what you want to believe, over in Chapel Hill. Les Miles got fired several years ago at Kansas. The old guard has been gone for a while, right? Bob Stoops, Larry Coker, Jim Tressel, and Bobby Bowden, Phil Fulmer, that bunch, right? Those are the guys that won in the 90s. The funny thing about the national championship is this. Every year, somebody has to win it. So eventually, there's going to be a new crop of coaches with a national championship on their resume, as evidenced by Ryan Day finally winning his first. And with 12 teams, and maybe 14 or 16, getting into the playoff every year going forward, the list of championship coaches is likely going to get bigger. More games means more chances for injury, and the transfer portal has gotten rid of the depth that the bigger brand teams used to enjoy so much. For example, Georgia lost their quarterback in the SEC championship game last year. Then they had to start Gunnar Stockton in the Sugar Bowl instead of who would have likely been the second-string quarterback, Brock Vandegrift, who transferred to start at Kentucky after developing, for several years in Athens. So back to the question here. Who is the next head coach to win their first national championship? To start this off, let's pull the candidates together. No G5 team is capable of winning a national championship these days. So that takes away 68 coaches. I don't believe any Big 12 teams have the recruiting acumen to be able to win a national championship in the new format. So that knocks out 16 coaches. So that puts us now at 84 coaches that I don't believe will be the next to win the national championship. Notre Dame made the national championship game last year, so we've got to include their coach on the list, Marcus Freeman, right? So he's on there. In the ACC, I think there are only 3 schools that can recruit at the level needed to win a title, and that would be Florida State with Mike Norvell, and even he hasn't done great as of late. Miami, Florida, of course, the Hurricanes, Mario Cristobal, and then there's Clemson, Dabo, as we mentioned before. That means 14 ACC coaches that are not at a job where you can win a national title. So that brings us up to 98 coaches marked off. In the Big Ten, I believe currently there are only 4 programs capable of winning a national title in the next 4 to 5 years. We'll say that. And those would be Oregon with Dan Lanning, Penn State with James Franklin, Michigan with Sharon Moore. Of course, Michigan won one just 2 years ago with Jim Harbaugh. And then Ohio State just won one last year with Ryan Day. So that means another 14 coaches, because there's 18 teams in the Big Ten. If 4 of them can win, that means 14 cannot. So I don't believe they can realistically win a title in the next 4 to 5 years. So now we're at 112 coaches on our list that cannot win one in the next few years. In the SEC, the list is a little bit bigger. When you look at just basic recruiting rankings, of the 16 SEC teams, there are 9 that have averaged a top 15 class every year for the last 4 seasons. Those would be Alabama. Their average rank is 2nd for a recruiting class with Kalen DeBoer. Georgia, Kirby Smart averaged the 2nd, or the number 2 class. Texas, the number 3.75 class. Steve Sarkisian is the coach there. LSU, the number 8.5 class with Brian Kelly. Oklahoma, surprisingly, the 9.75 class with Brent Venables. Texas A&M, 10.5 with Mike Elko. Florida, 13 with Billy Napier. Tennessee, 13 with Josh Heupel. And Auburn, 14 with Hugh Freeze. Now, obviously, the transfer portal changes things as well. We've certainly seen that over the past 4 to 5 years. Schedule is going to play a huge part in all this as well, but These are the coaches that have the base talent to be able to win potentially 4 playoff games against really, really good competition. That means 7 of the SEC teams, or 7 of the SEC coaches, are at jobs where it is pretty unlikely. So that puts us at 119 schools where they are probably not going to win a national title. So you look at 119, you add on the 3 active coaches that have won titles, Ryan Day, Dabo Swinney, and Kirby Smart, because they won't count for this exercise. So we've got 122 coaches that I don't believe should be included in this list as who will be next to win their first national championship. There are currently 136 FBS football programs heading into the 2025 season. Welcome Missouri State and Delaware to the Conference USA, of course. But that gives us a list of 14 coaches that have not won a national championship but potentially could. So let's list those out before I rank my top 5. Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman, Florida State's Mike Norvell, Mario Cristobal at Miami, Dan Lanning at Oregon, James Franklin at Penn State, Sharon Moore at Michigan, Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Brian Kelly at LSU, Brent Venables at Oklahoma, Mike Elko at Texas A&M, Billy Napier at Florida, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, and Hugh Freeze at Auburn. Okay, so the next few first-time national champions are likely going to come from this list. And if we look at the latest odds from FanDuel, these are the teams with the best chance of winning the championship this season. Now, this is as of Sunday, March 9th. Texas, plus 650, that is the second best odds. Oregon, plus 650, tied for second best odds. Penn State, plus 800, that's at 5th. Notre Dame, plus 1,200 is 6th. Tennessee, plus 1,600 is 7th. Alabama is also plus 1,600, tied for 7th. LSU, plus 2,000 at 10th. So, let's roll with my top 5 and my reasons behind these rankings. Number 5, Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. Yes, I know Freeman and Notre Dame were able to get to the national championship last season, but it took a series of circumstances that I do not believe they will get to every season. Not to mention they had an experienced senior quarterback with a perfect offensive coordinator. They had a DC in Al Golden that had built a next-man-up defense. Now the DC is gone. They bring in Chris Ash, who hasn't coached in college since 2020, and he was a scout in the NFL last season, not an active coach. So we'll see exactly how that fits. Freeman is a first-time head coach heading into his 4th season, and he just turned 39 in January. He's 33-10 as a head coach, 14-5 against ranked opponents, and the record has improved each season, but the schedule this season is going to be significantly more difficult than they faced in the last few years. They play at Miami, they host Texas A&M, at Arkansas, host Boise, host NC State, and USC in the first 8 weeks, and they're going to have a new quarterback at the helm, along with having to replace 8 guys that were at the NFL Combine. As far as recruiting rankings, they've had the 12th, 10th, 12th, and 9th ranked classes in the past 4 seasons. That would average out as the 7th highest average just in the SEC. Now, obviously, Freeman can continue to improve the roster. I still think it's a bit before we see a Notre Dame national championship. Just a guess. So he would not be first on my list. Number 4, Brian Kelly, LSU. The last 3 LSU coaches have all had at least one national championship season. Nick Saban in his 4th season there, Les Miles in his 4th season there, and Ed Orgeron in his 4th season, if you count his 2016 interim year as his first season. This will be Brian Kelly's 4th year at LSU. Both of his coordinators are in year 2. He's got an experienced senior quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier. They brought in the number 1 transfer portal class at 247, and that's going to help replace the 8 guys that they had in the NFL Combine. Kelly is 292, 107, and 2 as a head coach, and he's 29 and 11 at LSU. He's made 2 college football playoffs at Notre Dame. He had an undefeated season at Cincinnati. He won 2 Division II national titles at Grand Valley State. Bottom line, the guy just wins. Just wins. Since he took over LSU, the Tigers are 4-8 straight up against ranked opponents. He's going to have to work on getting over the cliche that he can't win the big one. But if they can get the defense fixed at all with the defensive coordinator Blake Baker, they should have a good chance at making some noise in the playoff in the next few years. This year's schedule does look a bit daunting, as all SEC schedules do, but it's not overwhelming. And the breaks with buys and weaker teams come at the perfect spots on the calendar. I've got them with the 10th most difficult SEC schedule. I've got them the 17th most difficult overall schedule in the Power 4. This could be a year for LSU to surprise some folks. Number 3, Dan Lanning with Oregon. Lanning, like Marcus Freeman, first-time head coach heading into his 4th full season. He boasts a 35-6 record and a Big Ten Conference title from an undefeated 13-0 2024 season before they got smacked around in the Rose Bowl by eventual national champion Ohio State. Also, like Freeman, he's going to be turning 39 next month. His record has improved every season in Eugene. But the difference between the two is that Lanning has had more recruiting success. Oregon has averaged a top 8 class in each of the last 4 years, so there's plenty of talent in key positions, even with losing 12 guys that were at the NFL Combine this season. Lanning is 11-6 against ranked opponents at Oregon, with 3 of those losses coming to Kalen DeBoer when he was at Washington, 1 to Kirby Smart, 1 to Ryan Day, 1 to Jonathan Smith's Oregon State squad back in 2022. I've got Oregon with the 7th most difficult schedule in the Big Ten this season, but Oregon will be highly rated again because of their talent. The only question that they've got is whether or not the new starting quarterback, Dante Moore, whether or not he can be successful taking over the reins after having super experienced quarterbacks every season that Lanning has been at the helm. This will be the first time they've got a quarterback that really doesn't have a bunch of experience. So we'll see exactly what they can do this year. Number 2, Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. DeBoer made it to a CFP title game at Washington, and at 50 years old, he has an overall coaching record, or head coaching record, of 113-16. He's got 3 NAIA national championships. He won the Pac-12 title in 2023, made it to the national title game with Washington, and his record against ranked opponents as a coach at Fresno, Washington, and Alabama is 15-3. You start looking at some of the other names on this list, he is a combined 7-0 against Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, and Brian Kelly. He is the only coach in my top 5 that has not been at his current school for at least 3 seasons. He's only heading into year 2 in Tuscaloosa. As far as recruiting goes, it doesn't get much better than what Alabama's done over the past 4 seasons. The Tide has averaged the number 2 recruiting class in the country for each of the last 4 years. That is tied for the top spot with Georgia. So there's still plenty of talent in Tuscaloosa for DeBoer and company to scheme with, even with losing 9 guys that were at the NFL Combine. Kane Wommack's defense was top 10 in predicted points added per drive last season, number 11 in success rate, number 6 in points allowed per drive. They return a slew of starters on that side of the ball. Now the offense just needs a kickstart and maybe some stability with a different quarterback. That's most likely going to be junior Ty Simpson. But they do have the highest rated recruit in Alabama history with the quarterback Keelan Russell as well. Of course, they will have new offense coordinator Ryan Grubb. He was with the Seahawks last season, but he's been at nearly every stop of DeBoer's coaching career with him. The schedule this year is tough. I've got it the 7th most difficult schedule in Power 4, but the Tide, they've got some good returning production. They get Tennessee, LSU, and Oklahoma at home. They should have a more talented roster than almost every team on the schedule sans Georgia. If the offense gets fixed, a 10-2 Alabama could pull off what Ohio State did just last season. Number 1 on the list, Steve Sarkisian at Texas. Sark was widely expected to be next in line in Tuscaloosa once he was given the reins to run the Tide for one game when Nick Saban had to miss, due to COVID back in 2020. But the Longhorns scooped him up, and he has rebuilt that program in a big way heading into his 5th season in Austin. The Longhorns have the insanely hyped quarterback Arch Manning this season. The DC is heading into his 5th season with Sark at Texas, and the recruiting has been absolutely dynamite. They had 14 players at the NFL Combine, 13 of those graded at 6.1 or higher. And that means, basically, per the NFL grading, they had 13 players that could be, quote, good NFL backup with the potential to develop into a starter. That's pretty wild. Over their past 4 recruiting cycles, their average class ranks 3.75. That's 3rd in the country behind Alabama and Georgia. Sark, if you look at his overall record at Texas, he's only 12-12 against ranked opponents in Austin, but they are 10-5 against ranked opponents in the last 2 seasons now that he's got things running the way that he wants them. They won the Big 12 in 2023, played in the SEC Championship last season. They have made the CFP the last 2 years, They lost to DeBoer's Washington team in 2023, and then in 2024 lost to Ohio State in the semifinals. Sark is 38-17 at Texas, only 84-52 overall in 11 seasons as a head coach. But the thing to pay attention to there is the 11 seasons. That makes him the second most experienced coach in my top 5 behind Brian Kelly. Texas's schedule this season is the 23rd most difficult in the country. I've got it as the easiest conference schedule in the SEC. If Texas is going to win the SEC and potentially the national championship, it seems like this would be the year, even with an opening game at Ohio State. If Arch is great, this might be the only season they have him. He's already been behind Ewers for 2 seasons. So, the rundown again. Number 5, Marcus Freeman. Number 4, Brian Kelly. Number 3, Dan Lanning. Number 2, Kalen DeBoer. And my number 1 is Steve Sarkisian as the next coach to win their first national championship. Make sure and jump in the comments. Let me know how you would rank these coaches. Tell me if I left any off of the list, etc. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel, that you like the video, and don't forget to check out bettingcfb.com.
Thanks for listening to Winning Cures Everything. Make sure and follow me on Twitter @GaryWCE. If you want to toss in a question, you can email me Gary@winningcureseverything.com. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.